Och här kommer nu det femte och sista delen i vår serie tema Imperiets Svanesång. Och programmet handlar ikväll om Egypten. Det här avsnittet sänds i repris söndagen den 16 november klockan 15.55 och vidare så återkommer vi med ytterligare 5 program i serien under januari 1977. Kvällens program är textat av Text-TV.
All my life I've been a man of peace. Working for peace, striving for peace, negotiating for peace. I've been a League of Nations man and a United Nations man. And I'm still the same man, with the same convictions, the same devotion to peace. I couldn't be other, even if I wished. But I'm utterly convinced that the action we have taken is right.
Napoleon once said Egypt is the most important country in the world. And I think he was right. It is the crossroads of Asia, Africa, and the Mediterranean. It's the bridge. And it became, of course, more important with the building of the Suez Canal.
So the Suez Canal is the cause, you might say, it's the cause of the humiliation we had by British occupation of Egypt for more than 70 years.
För brittiska imperiet var Egypten mer än bara pyramiderna och Sphinxen. Det var Suezkanalen, imperiets livlina. I kanalzonen hade Storbritannien sin största utländska militärbas som skulle ta itu med varje hot mot imperiets handel och stabilitet. Största delen av Storbritanniens besittningar låg bortom Suez. Egypten var till namnet självständigt, men britterna behöll kontrollen. Och 1936 slogs den fast i en traktat. Egyptierna hade inget annat val än att se glada ut.
Mr. Anthony Eden presided when the Anglo-Egyptian Pact was signed.
Of their common interest and the symbol of a freely agreed and enduring partnership between the British and Egyptian people.
For Egypt, the treaty was signed by the Premier, Nahas Pasha. For Britain, by Mr. Eden, the Foreign Secretary. Outside the Foreign Office, Nahas Pasha made a short speech for the GB camera.
I'm very happy to sign the treaty. Treaty of friendship and alliance between the two people friends, England and Egypt.
Det fanns ingen jämlikhet i vänskapen. Brittiska ambassadören fortsatte att regera i Kairo och lät egyptierna få känna av sitt underläge. Han brukade tala om Farouk, kungen av Egypten, som pojken och tvingade till och med på honom den premiärminister som Storbritannien ville ha. Under andra världskriget blev Kairo brittiska imperiets nervcentrum. Premiärminister Winston Churchill och hans närmaste man Anthony Eden for dit gång på gång för att övervaka kampanjerna i Afrika, Mellanöstern och Sydeuropa. I traktaten från 1936 hade Storbritannien förbundit sig att dra ner på sina trupper i Egypten. Efter kriget blev det löftet inte uppfyllt och sveket ledde till att egyptiska nationalister började gerillakrig. De 80 000 brittiska soldaterna försökte slå ner motståndet, men 1950 kom det till granatkastning, kidnappningar och sabotage. Brittiska kvinnor och barn måste evakueras.
Well, we were supposed to be guarding the most strategic part of the world. this is what we were always told, that we were an active service. But the sporadic activities of the Egyptian guerrillas effectively tied us up in our own camp. And they were effective insofar as that they almost made us prisoners within our own camp.
كل واحد بيقدر يعمل أي حاجة بيعملها. ممكن يعني حتى الأطفال يعني اللي ما يعرفش يعمل حاجة هو بيضرب بالطوب. فكان لما تمر أي عربية من الجيش البريطاني بتبقى في خطر من كل ناحية. ويعني اللي كان العربية اللي تنزل كانت مضطرة اضطرار شديد جدا. فكانوا بيلاقوا مضايقات كتير لأن كان يهمنا إن الناس دول يمشوا بأي طريقة.
Storbritannien höll kvar alla sina militära styrkor, om inte annat så för att bevaka sina militära flygfält, järnvägar och förråd. Egyptiska regeringen anklagade den brittiska för att ha brutit traktaten. Och i oktober 1951 rev de traktaten. Den ansvarige hade själv undertecknat den 15 år tidigare. Han hette Nahas Pasha.
The parliament was so 3 minutes at least standing applauding Nahas Pasha. All over Egypt, from Aswan to Alexandria, demonstrations, and from all people, Fellahin, laborers, everybody in Egypt was so happy.
Anti-British posters are swept along on a rising tide of nationalism as Egyptians of all classes heap abuse upon the country that defended their frontiers in World War II.
Egyptiska regeringen understödde i hemlighet gerillan i kanalzonen. 2 av kung Farouks medlemmar i kabinettet förklarar varför.
In order to prove to the United Kingdom, to the leaders of Great Britain, that the base is useless, as we explained to them in the negotiations. The base is useless, and we denied to them all privileges delivered to them by the treaty. And we made a law that prevents any Egyptian to deal with the British. And the punishment. It reaches to capital punishment. To give them any ammunition, any stocks, any dealing with the British. It was prohibited.
حتى كان عندي 130 عجل موجودين في كارانتين البورسعيد. سبتهم عشان امون الاهالي. اديهم للناس. مش قد الجيش البريطاني يعني كنا عاوزين يعني نعمل لهم مضايقات بكل الاسباب كل السبل.
So I was decided with some of my friends who was been treating same me that we must fight all the British troops which in Egypt for these troops whom were help the Europe's to treat us as animals and insects and something same that.
Vintern 1951 trappades våldet upp i hela kanalzonen. Egyptiska polisen rekryterade och beväpnade deltidsgerilla som anföll brittisk militär. Britterna svarade med allt hårdare razzior. I januari 1952 hade britterna fått nog. Trupper spärrade av staden Ismailia och omringade polishögkvarteret.
This was the scene in Ismailia after British troops had waited while orders were broadcast to Egyptian police to leave their headquarters and surrender.
After 1 hour, or more or less, I had some casualties in the area. And the switchboard man asked me that the Minister of Interior on the telephone and want to speak to the officer in charge, who was me. And I spoke with him. He said, what's going on? So I held the telephone, and he heard the shooting of the British troops.
Den egyptiske inrikesministern tog sin chans. Den brittiske befälhavaren, överste Exham, ville ha ett avgörande och det ville han också.
He said, well, what are you going to do? I said, we already have our own decision. And he asked me what it is. I said, we are going not to surrender to the terms of Brigadier Exam. And we are not going to leave this place, even if we all die. And I told Brigadier Exam that I know he will enter this place, but only he will receive dead bodies. So the minister said, all right, God will be with you. And the line was cut after that. Every minute we got casualties. I mean, lost his arm, lost his leg, severe wounds.
To save heavy British losses, which would result in storming this armed fortress, Centurion tanks blast their way into the target. After the softening up process came a determined charge as the Fusiliers burst into the now ruined building.
I was surprised at the carnage. It was quite awful, really. I think there was about 50 Egyptians killed. There was quite a few wounded, and quite seriously wounded, some of them.
Fram mot kvällen ändrade britterna sig. Att fortsätta skulle göra mera skada än nytta. Den egyptiske polischefen tyckte likadant.
I decided to put an end for that, believe me. So I decided to go out. Either I killed Exam or he killed me. Because it was, if you, Hitchcock himself can do this terrifying atmosphere. So when I went out, I was shocked by seeing general, full general. General Matthews. It was about 6 o'clock in the afternoon. And before I went to Exham, because he was my aim, he saluted me. And I was astonished. A general, a full general saluted a captain. So I stopped and I saluted him. And he spoke with me very nicely and very encouraging. And he said, anything you want, all your terms, I am ready to accept it.
När kapitulationen kom hade minst 50 poliser blivit dödade i poliskasernen i Ismailia, också kallad kommendanturen.
When Colonel Malik entered the governorate after this event was finished, about 7 o'clock in the afternoon, he put his hands on his eyes and he said, what a rotten job we have done.
Nästa dag tog folkmassorna i Kairo hämnd på utlänningarna. Många blev dödade när hästsportklubben, Shepherds Hotel och omkring 400 andra byggnader brändes ner under det som kom att kallas den svarta lördagen. Men Anthony Eden höll huvudet kallt.
He decided that the troops should not be moved from Ismailia, which we were quite capable of doing, and that Farouk must be left to deal with the situation which he had largely created by arousing the fury of the Cairo mob against Britain.
Kung Farouk och hans regering lyckades inte köra ut britterna. Det fanns andra som trodde sig kunna bättre.
From Cairo come these first authentic pictures of the bloodless coup by which the army took over control of Egypt. It was the end of the king's attempt to maintain power. To the ordinary Egyptian, the change is welcome, and it seems that Mohammed Naguib is assured of support at home. What the change will mean to the rest of the world, we have yet to see.
General Naguib var en galjonsfigur, men snart skulle en yngre och kraftfullare officer ta ledningen, överste Gamal Abdel Nasser. Han och hans kollegor tog med förnyade krafter itu med uppgiften att driva ut britterna. De sökte stöd hos de traditionellt antiimperialistiska amerikanerna, som allt mer började intressera sig för Mellanöstern.
The Americans in that period were very active, and they were also interested because they were also they were also interested in the pacts, in the mutual security pacts. So they were coming out with formulas. I remember that practically all the formulas which were given to us by the British later on were previously given to us by the Americans, and the Americans played the role of, you know, they were the sounding power, if you want to say so. They modified some things with us. They appeared to us as if they are playing the role of an honest broker.
Under det kalla kriget sökte USAs utrikesminister John Foster Dulles efter allierade som kunde gå med i västmakternas pakter mot Sovjet. När han besökte Kairo i maj 1953 bad egyptierna om vapen för eget bruk. Dulles sa nej, med ett litet undantag.
We just opened our first meeting and the press was all there, of course, taking pictures of the gathering, and then that phase was finished and they all went out and the door was closed. And Dulles reached behind his back and pulled out a box and handed Naguib a pistol. And all hell broke loose, really. You see, it was an insignificant thing, but it looked like a symbol. It looked like we were offering to back Naguib against his adversaries, which included, of course, the British. It didn't make us very popular in London.
During the course of their talk, Secretary Dulles, while seeking the safeguarding of the Suez Canal, agrees that a withdrawal of foreign troops should be effected as soon as Suez guarantees can be made.
The U.S. both sort of urged or pressed the British to try to be forthcoming to make a deal, and also offered, as I recall it, the Egyptians various, I think some economic and military aid if a settlement could be reached.
It was only natural that using one side against the other, we could get better out of it. And that is why we had very close contacts with the Americans to influence the going on of the negotiations that were going on at that time between us and Great Britain to evacuate the British forces.
كان الغزاة الأجانب يحتلون أرض مصر، يحتلون القواعد المدججة بالسلاح، ترهب الوطن المصري وتحطم مقاومته.
1954 hade brittiske utrikesministern Anthony Eden kommit fram till att Suezbasen var till större besvär än den var värd. Men den åsikten motarbetades av en högljudd parlamentsgrupp inom hans eget parti och av premiärministern.
Churchill was the man who said that he had not become the Queen's first minister or the King's first minister in those days to preside over the dissolution of the British Empire. And he realized the crucial importance of the Suez zone, of the canal zone. This was the strong point for the Navy, the Air Force, the Army, linking the Commonwealth as a defense unit. And he was therefore very much against the proposed withdrawal. On the other hand, he was 80. Eden, who was his crown prince, was for it. The Americans were for it. Of course, the Russians were for it. So he was in a difficult position.
In fact, he was eventually reasoned out of this attitude, largely by the chiefs of staff and also by Anthony Eden himself, who felt that we had to redeploy our forces, that to keep troops in the canal zone was a nonsense in modern terms, because instead of defending the canal zone against some potential aggressor, Russia or whoever might invade the Middle East and try and take the canal, the British garrison there, which was some 80,000 strong, was in fact defending itself against a hostile population, and therefore was really performing no useful military role whatsoever.
I september 1954 undertecknade Anthony Nutting och president Nasser ett avtal där Storbritannien äntligen gick med på att dra tillbaka sina trupper. En uppgift som skulle ta 20 månader.
After I'd signed the agreement, Anthony Eden sent me a telegram saying, don't come home immediately. You've had your head in details of negotiations, both you and Nasser, for the last 2 months. Go off and find out what makes the man tick. talk to him and find out how he sees the future. And I came back with this report saying I thought that he was a man of considerable charisma. He was a great patriot, determined to remain neutral as between the power blocks in the world, but equally prepared and anxious to have good relations with Britain and to open this new chapter on a friendly note. And Anthony Eden seemed to share this hope at that time, but then of course the situation changed.
Egypten firade att Storbritannien började dra bort sina trupper. Nasser såg det som imperialismens uttåg ur Mellanöstern. Men samtidigt la britterna fram en ny plan för att behålla övertaget i området. Det var Bagdadpakten. Storbritanniens vänner och allierade, Turkiet och Irak, välkomnade den trygghet som brittiskt stöd skulle innebära och gick med i pakten i februari 1955. Samma månad försökte britterna övertala Egypten att gå med. Det hade ofta varit på brittiska ambassaden i Kairo som Egyptens framtid hade avgjorts. Nu kom Anthony Eden hit med ett följe av höga brittiska diplomater och militärer och inbjöd president Nasser till en middag. Det skulle bli enda gången de möttes, ett möte mellan två världar.
At the beginning, you know, there was some social talk when Mr. Eden, before dinner, when Mr. Eden was talking, as a matter of fact, about him being an expert on Egyptian affairs. When President Nasser, as a matter of fact, did not utter a word at that part. It was Eden, the star of Western diplomacy, talking about the role he played in the signing of the treaty of 1936. And he even greeted President Nasser when he entered in Arabic, and Nasser was astonished.
For some reason or other, Anthony Eden tried to upstage him, and Nasser resented this and clearly showed his resentment. And from then on, the two men really, I think, rather disliked one another. And this, of course, did not help to produce this friendly relationship that I thought I'd laid the foundations of only a few weeks before.
It was in their interest, just as much as in ours, we thought that they should join the Baghdad Pact. And after I'd finished describing this sort of general strategic concept, Anthony asked Nasser if he'd like to comment on what I'd had to say, and Nasser said, well, I agree completely. Well, that rather flummoxed me, because we then went on, and Anthony Eden tried for the best part of an hour to convince Nasser of what I would have thought was the logical conclusion of that they should join the Baghdad Pact. But no, for a solid hour.
It was not only a national idea, but it was a national question. I mean, that we are refusing to join any pact because we believe that if you want the colonial power to leave the door, they shouldn't come from the window. So that's why we are refusing the idea, and we were reluctant to accept the idea that the Russians are the main threat to us. We in all our history, we never felt that the Russians are really a threat to Egypt or to the Middle East. They never attacked us, never in all our history. But we were repeating that the main danger was the existing of the policy of Israel.
Mindre än 16 dagar efter Idens sammanträffande med Nasser besvarade Israel de egyptiskstödda gränsräderna med ett anfall i full skala på egyptiska trupper vid Gaza. Nasser ansåg att han genast måste köpa in nya vapen. Hos USA och Storbritannien fick han inte köpa. Därför drevs han till motsidan, Sovjetunionen.
Nasser was living at that time in the Revolutionary Council building. So was many of the Revolutionary Council members, and we were spending days and nights discussing the political, aspect of the question, whether if we take such a step, We knew how antagonized the Western countries and America would be. But at the end of the discussions, we found out that we had no other alternative except to go for the Soviet Union.
I would say that when we started having some feelers about the possibility of having arms from the Soviet Union, there was this idea vague in the air that maybe if the Americans got wind of what was happening, they will come with the arms. This did not happen. And I remember that even after the Russians gave their first okay, that Nasser said to Bayreuth, the American ambassador, I have a Russian offer here in my desk. And it is for the first time that I am asking for American arms. And there was no answer. And they thought he was bluffing.
On the question of arms, I never got an answer from Washington that I could pass on to Nasser. I was never told why, but it was perfectly obvious to me that the supporters of Israel is a very strong political force in American domestic politics. And I think there was a reluctance in Washington to take on that criticism in arms to Egypt.
Nasser fick uppmuntran från ledare bland de alliansfria nationerna och i september 1955 slöt han avtal om inköp av vapen från Sovjet. Detta uppfattade Dulles som en aggressionshandling. Iden kände sig mera förtörnad över Nassers propagandasändare, arabernas röst, som sände över hela Mellanöstern. Den vädjade till Storbritanniens arabiska allierade att befria sig från sina bojor, och det störde Idens omsorgsfullt utarbetade planer.
The voice of the Arabs and Nasser's positions at that time created a tidal wave of Arab nationalism in the area. And the British were unable to understand that this was the normal reaction of a suppressed revolution, evolution in the making. And they considered it all plotting by Nasser and, a grand design.
Arabernas röst slog först till mot britterna här i Amman, huvudstad i grannlandet Jordanien. Det framkallade en kris som skulle locka Antoniden in i en virvel av felbedömningar i fråga om Egypten. Storbritannien var fortfarande den dominerande makten i Jordanien och den unge kung Hussein hade varit beredd att ansluta sig till Bagdadpakten. Men så kraftig blev oppositionen på jordanska nationalister som hade uppmuntrats av Nassers propaganda att kung Hussein ändrade sig. I Jordanien trodde en del att britterna i ilskan över Husseins helomvändning rent av skulle kunna avsätta honom.
Well, you see, the British thought this Baghdad Pact was so vital for Western interests, for British interests, especially in this area, which is very important, as we know all. And they thought that by mobilizing all the states in this area to join the Baghdad Pact, Turkey, Iran, and Iraq, they will form a formidable strength in the face of any Russian advance. For that purpose, the monarch of Jordan was really not somebody whom they would weigh against such an important goal they were looking at, aiming at. They were going to sacrifice the king so that Jordan will join the Baghdad Pact under the name of unity with Iraq.
Jordaniens armé, arabvärldens elittrupper, underhölls av Storbritannien. Nu ville en del yngre officerare göra sig av med britterna, och i synnerhet med den brittiska överbefälhavaren Sir John Glubb. Iden såg Glubb som en pålitlig kraft i en nyckelposition. Kung Husseins farfar hade fått sin tron av britterna, och nu satt Hussein i kläm mellan dem och sina egna nationalister. I det besvärliga läget föreslog Glubb att vissa yngre officerare skulle avskedas. Kungen fick höra att britterna planerade att göra sig av med honom själv också.
The situation was not a very, very pleasant one here at all, in point of fact. I think that it was very close to the boil. People still looked at me as a person they cared for. I was my grandfather's grandson, and his choice to take over his position. The Baghdad Pact crisis, as far as Jordan was concerned, was just over. The area was in turmoil. The country was under many pressures. and it was a state of agitation. But more than that, just probably a couple of days before, we had received a list of dismissals of some Jordanian officers, and I really felt that that was the end of it. I couldn't sign it and destroy the chances of some officers whom might have been able to serve their country.
The king called me from his cousin's house, and he said, "Can you do it tomorrow?" He meant, "Can you effect your operation tomorrow?" I said to him, "Even now, I am ready." So he said, "All right, I'm coming to see you." He came to the palace, and we met in my office. And we decided at 9 o'clock tomorrow morning, everything will be done to take control of the army, to put in custody all the British officers in all the units, fighting units. And only one man not to be touched, to give him as far liberty as possible, not more. That was Glub, because he was the head.
Well, I was in my office one morning and I got a telephone message asking me to come down to the Prime Minister's office. I walked into his office and sat down. There was nobody there. He came in a minute or two later. Of course, I'd known him for 25 years or so.
Yeah.
And he said, it's very painful for me, but I've got to tell you that the king says that he thinks it's time you had a rest. And he said, well, we'd like you to leave in 2 hours.
2 hours after 26 years. Why should they give you such a fantastically short time limit as that?
Well, I think some of the advisors had told the king that I should probably refuse to go and call out the army and try to make a revolution or something like this.
Could you, in fact, if you wanted to, have called the Arab Legion out against the king and deposed him and taken over and everything else?
Well, I wouldn't go as far as that, but one could have made a lot of trouble, of course, but it's just the kind of thing you don't do. I spent all my life serving them.
Vad Glub än hade haft för planer hade de blivit förekomna. Många inom det konservativa partiet begärde hårda åtgärder i Churchills stil. Men nu var Eden premiärminister, inte Churchill. Och det var han som fick ta itu med Glubs avskedande.
This came, of course, as a body blow to Eden's pride and vanity. And his reaction was violent, and he looked around for a scapegoat, and the scapegoat was Nasser, because Nasser was obviously delighted that General Glub should have been removed. But Nasser had not been behind it. Nasser had not ordered the dismissal of Glub, but Eden was convinced that he had.
No truth whatsoever. Nasser had no idea what was happening here, or certainly didn't know of our decision. And I think it was as much a surprise to Nasser as it was to the world as a whole.
Missförstånden ökade. Samma dag som Glub fick avsked råkade den nya utrikesministern Selwyn Lloyd vara i Kairo för att besöka Nasser.
Nasser was really surprised that it happened, but he at the beginning he thought that the British did it and timed it with Selwyn Lloyd's visit to Cairo as a sign of goodwill towards the Arabs. So it was a misunderstanding, obviously, which led to, after that, to so many complications.
I was horrified to get a telephone call over an open line to the Savoy Hotel in which Anne Eden said, "What's all this poppycock you sent me about isolating and quarantining Nasser? Can't you understand, and if you can't understand it, will you come to the cabinet and explain why, that I want Nasser," and he actually used the word murdered.
Hädanefter ansåg Eden att Nasser var ute efter att utplåna allt inflytande Storbritannien ännu kunde ha i Mellanöstern. Han förklarade personligt krig mot den egyptiske ledaren. Eden visste vad Nilen betydde för Egypten. Han hade varit den ledande kraften bakom ett brittiskt-amerikanskt erbjudande att bygga en damm över Nilen vid Assuan. Det skulle bli den största fördämningen i världen. Och för Nasser symboliserade den hans löfte att modernisera Egypten. Nu beslöt Eden att stoppa projektet. Dulles hade sina egna skäl att följa Eden och han inställde lånet till dammbygget. Nassers maktställning stod på spel. Han måste komma med ett kraftfullt svar.
On July 26, Gamal Abdel Nasser nationalized the Suez Canal Company. At Alexandria, an inflamed and engulfing crowd heard President Nasser say, "At this moment, some of your brothers are now taking over the Suez Canal. The canal," he said, "is the property of Egypt. 120,000 Egyptian workers died digging the canal. We will build the high dam."
Nationaliseringen kom som en överraskning för britterna och för fransmännen som hade skött kanalen i 70 år trots växande egyptisk ovilja. Men Nasser visste att han inte bara hade egyptiska folket utan också rätten på sin sida.
Well, we were studying that for more than 2 years, but not nationalization. We tried to study the history, our rights, and the rights of the Suez Canal Company, the rights of the users. But after the withdrawal of the high dam loans and aids, we thought that we must nationalize the Suez Canal Company. They used to take 16 million pounds to be distributed every year, and we thought that the Egyptian people can use these 16 million pounds for the development of their projects.
I told him I thought he had missed, his staff had missed the point completely. They had judged the French and British reaction mostly because of financial loss in shares of the Suez Canal Company. And I said I didn't think that was the answer at all. It was bound to be a very emotional issue.
Plainly, a great issue had arisen. I thought, and my friends thought, that the withdrawal from the canal zone had been potentially fatal to the unity of the Commonwealth. Was there now an opportunity to retrieve it? I was convinced there was, and that if we pressed an attack against Egypt, political if possible, but military if necessary, we could recover the ground that had been lost.
Our quarrel is not with Egypt, still less with the Arab world. It is with Colonel Nasser. We all know this is how fascist governments behave. And we all remember, only too well, what the cost can be in giving in to fascism. We cannot agree that an act of plunder, which threatens the livelihood of many nations, should be allowed to succeed.
I think he was secretly rather delighted, because this gave him the pretext to marshal his forces, literally military forces, to destroy this man on whom he had declared his personal war at the time of the dismissal of Glove. Which pretext up till then he had lacked, because Nasser had done nothing to offend, done nothing to give Eden any possibility or excuse for taking direct action of any kind against Nasser.
Has there ever been a time during this crisis when you thought the British and French might actually use force?
Well, of course, because of these threats of use of force, concentrations, and movement of troops, I thought that any time I'll be facing an act of aggression. Until now, I'm still thinking. No, I think it is a matter of prestige. I think they are sure that we will not close the canal or raise the tolls. Because if we close the canal, we'll be in trouble. Suppose we close the canal against Britain, what will be the result? Britain will have the cause to defend her interests, to defend her economy, and then they will be able to have an aggressive action against Egypt. I don't think at all that we will be in a position to be in war with Britain. And I think British are sure that we will not have any discrimination against them, against their lifeline, as they said, against their economy. But really it is a matter of prestige.
His estimation was that if the British did not interfere directly in the first 2 weeks, then every week after that the possibility of military intervention will diminish. So the most important thing was A, to know what is the state of preparedness now, B, to know what are the possibilities of political maneuver so that we can gain time. And his estimate was, if they don't have enough power to interfere now, then all our policy should be directed to gaining time as much as we can.
Tills vidare såg egyptierna till att kanalen fungerade och de lotsade igenom fler fartyg än någonsin. Nasser såg noga till att Eden inte fick någon förevändning för ett militärt ingripande. USAs president Eisenhower och hans utrikesminister Dulles var lika angelägna om att undvika krig.
During the summer, Dulles essentially invented a series of actions or steps like the London meeting, like the Users Association, like the meeting at the UN, all of which were designed to try to keep the negotiating process going and to keep things from coming to a head, which would give the British a pretext for using force. And I think that Eden became aware of what was happening, and he became resentful because he felt that, in a sense, Dulles was outsmarting him, that he thought he would get Dulles into a corner in which he would be able to say to Dulles and to Eisenhower, you see, we've exhausted all the other possibilities, there's nothing to do but to resort to force. And every time he tried to do that, he'd think he was having him in a corner, and Dulles would come out through a new trap door and avoid getting trapped.
The world was indeed happy to share the gratification of President Eisenhower yesterday when he opened his televised conference by saying, I have an announcement. I have got the best announcement that I could possibly make to America tonight.
Efter 3 månaders förhandlingar hade man utarbetat en överenskommelse, de 6 principerna. Äntligen såg det ut som om man hade en lösning som kunde tillfredsställa alla.
Is most gratifying. Egypt, Britain and France have met through their foreign ministers and agreed on a set of principles on which to negotiate, and it looks like here is a very great crisis that is behind us.
And we thought that we were gaining time and that we were diffusing the crisis. The 6 points in the Security Council, I remember that when we returned back, the message from Hammarskjöld, the message from the Indians, when I returned back from these meetings of the Security Council around the 15th of October, President Nasser was completely under the impression that the crisis is over.
So far as Eden was concerned, he didn't want a negotiated settlement. He wanted to topple Nasser. And I think almost Eden's worst moment in the whole of the Suez crisis was when Selwyn Lloyd, Christian Pinault, the French foreign minister, and Mahmoud Fawzi, the Egyptian foreign minister, reached an agreement of the Suez Canal question in New York, behind the scenes at the United Nations, towards the end of October of 1956.
Eden verkade ha missat sin chans att ta hämnd. Men medan Lloyd var i FN var biträdande ministern Anthony Nutting hos premiärministern på hans landställe Chequers. Dit kom en fransk delegation med en djärv plan. Israel skulle anfalla Egypten tvärs över kanalen och Frankrike skulle ge Israel stöd, återta kanalen och störta Nasser. Men det fattades en viktig ingrediens.
The only snag, of course, was that the French did not have bomber bases anywhere near enough to take care of Nasser's air force. Only the British did. So the British had to be brought into the conspiracy with France and Israel. And at that moment you could see the whole cloud had disappeared for Anthony Eden. This was the opportunity to put into effect his declaration of war on Nasser, because Nasser had refused to give him any pretext, even after the nationalization of the company. But with the Israelis marching on the canal, he could say the canal is going to be irreparably damaged by warfare. We must intervene and put out the fire. We must intervene and stop the war.
Planen sattes i verket. Israel anföll den 29 oktober. Den 30 ställde Storbritannien och Frankrike ett ultimatum där man krävde att både Egypten och Israel skulle dra sig tillbaka 1,5 mil från kanalen, annars skulle man invadera. Den 31, när ultimatumet löpte ut, gick trupptransportfartyg ut för att börja invasionen. Och enligt överenskommelse bombade britterna egyptiska flygbaser.
Flown from aircraft carriers were hundreds of sorties attacking military targets near Port Said. This followed up heavy bombing raids which had already put Egyptian airfields out of service and all but destroyed Nasser's air force.
I've never known anything like it in my whole diplomatic career, and I've been to several hotspots. It was quite extraordinary. We had virtually all the United Nations against us, and it wasn't only in their resolutions, there was a sort of almost a personal atmosphere about it.
My government and the French government are accused of committing an act of aggression. This, Mr. President, is a very serious charge to make in the Security Council, bearing in mind the provisions of Chapter 7 of the Charter. We strongly deny such charges
and do not think it will be profitable for the Council to discuss them.
We used to always have our drinks with the American delegation. We were close friends. At the time of Suez, about 2/3 of them wouldn't talk to us. And the one or two who did were rather brave. We felt like pariahs, sort of underdogs and outcasts.
I doubt that any delegate ever spoke from this forum with as heavy a heart as I have brought here tonight. We speak on a matter of vital importance, where the United States finds itself unable to agree with three nations with whom it has ties of deep friendship, of admiration and respect, and two of whom constitute our oldest, most trusted and reliable allies.
And of course we were meanwhile lying through our teeth to the American ambassador in London and saying that we had no knowledge of any Israeli intention to attack Egypt. And when the Israelis did attack and we drew up the famous ultimatum telling everybody to clear out of the canal zone, Egyptians and Israelis, we again lied to the American ambassador and said that this was the first intimation we'd ever had of any Israeli intention to march into march onto Egyptian soil.
Anthony Nutting och 2 andra ministrar avgick, men utan att ange något skäl. Därför fick demonstranterna som protesterade överallt i Storbritannien inte veta hela sanningen. Idens sammansvärjning med Frankrike och Israel, och hur han förde parlamentet, hela Storbritannien och de allierade bakom ljuset. Iden höll ett tv-tal i förlitan på att ingen visste något. Han försökte också hindra oppositionsledaren från att svara honom i tv, men BBC ansåg att nationen var så splittrad att man måste avvisa premiärministerns begäran.
What should we do? We put the matter to the Security Council. Should we have left it at that? Should we have been content to wait to see whether they would act? How long would this have taken?
The Council had met, reached a clear decision, and been blocked by the Prime Minister's own veto. There was no lack of speed here. The trouble was obstruction. Obstruction by Great Britain.
What we did do was to take police action at once. Action to end the fighting and to separate the armies. We acted swiftly and reported to the Security Council, and I believe that before long it will become apparent to everybody that we acted rightly and wisely.
It is not a police action. There is no law behind it. We have taken the law into our own hands. The Prime Minister has said we were going in to separate the two sides. But you don't separate two armies by bombing airfields and landing troops 100 miles behind one side only. No, this is a second onslaught on a country which was already the victim of an attack.
At Portside Harbour and nearby, British troops came ashore. They were consolidating the work already done by paratroops and marine commandos in occupying this famous town at the north end of the Suez Canal. The capture of Portside was more difficult than was expected. Fires were still burning, result of house-to-house fighting, which General Keighley has described as very tough. But as the reinforcements came in, the battle was over. Happily, at surprisingly little cost, just over 100 killed and wounded.
Det blev brist på pengar och inte världens ogillande som tvingade Iden att hejda sig. Samma dag som brittiska trupper landsteg i Port Said rasade pundet på börsen.
Eisenhower was very serious about this issue. And he was determined that he was going to bring it to a stop. So when the run on Sterling began and the British turned to him to try to bail him out, his answer was, quit and I will. And I think he simply didn't have any intention of temporizing with it. He wanted it stopped. And that being the case, he was prepared to take whatever steps he could to bring it to an end.
Brittiska imperiet hade upptäckt att dess makt var begränsad. Iden blev tvungen att dra tillbaka sina trupper.
Before leaving, the troops leave a reminder of their 7-week occupation, a huge Union Jack nailed to a 180-foot flagstaff. This was made into a greasy pole to delay would-be climbers following the departure.
2 månader efter invasionen avgick Anthony Eden från posten som premiärminister. Han hade varit svårt sjuk i många månader.
Now, can I just say thank you very much for all your kindness to me, all of you, during my period of office. I wish my successor all good fortune and Godspeed to you all. Goodbye.
Thank you very much.
We've been architects of the UN. We were founders of an organization to keep the peace, not through force, but through negotiations and peaceful methods. And here we were, having to take an entirely different role. I thought we'd never hold our heads up again. Point of fact, within 6 months we did. But at that time, this was the end of empire for us. It was like Götterdämmerung, if you like, in a Wagnerian sense. And I don't want to go through that again.
You know, after Suez, Nasser became a hero. It changed him completely from being a ruler or a potential leader or a leader, and it made him a hero. And the effects, as a matter of fact, in Africa, the winds of change in Africa started after Suez.
Enda gången de träffades hade Iden behandlat Nasser nedlåtande. Då var Iden säker på sin ställning. Men efter Suez var det Nasser som hade självförtroende. Imperiet hade fått en knäck som det aldrig skulle hämta sig ifrån.